Pete McCrystal, the Vaxa Chief Explainer in Residence. Thanks for joining us again today, mate. How are you?
Very good, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Mate, no dramas, no dramas. Today we're going to be talking about local government digitisation. You've got a little bit of experience in that space, as do we as an organisation. Pete, tell me, what does the current situation look like for most local governments and how they manage their data and their systems?
Yeah, so basically they've got some challenges, of course. Always budget is a challenge, but they have a lot of data coming in from ratepayers and other stakeholders in the area. They're responsible for a heck of a lot, and the interaction with other services, first responders, police, etc., for both social community events and also looking after programs for those in need is quite large. So they have a lot of data and they need to find a way to make it work smarter for them so they can offer better services.
Yeah, right. So, mate, one of the big things that we've seen with all the conversations with local governments in Queensland and New South Wales and Australia, and we know that our colleagues in the US have the same conversations, is they seem to have all this data but don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to analyse it. They don't know where to start. So when you're talking about insights before you can get to optimising the data and then experience with the data, local governments seem to be, handcuffed or hamstrung as to how best to use that data. What's your experience there?
Yeah, basically I think there's a lot of silos, as there are in commercial organisations as well. The data lives in many databases, and there are certain folks who are only responsible for their own silo. And so I think there needs to be a little bit more trust in the sharing, and that implies a security framework that might need to be designed to make sure that that data is kept protected when they are sharing it amongst themselves in order to work out what services to offer the ratepayer and other stakeholders.
Right. So, councils and local governments all over the region put on numerous community events every year, and they also manage lots of public safety activities every year as well, be they planned or reactive. So they must gather a lot of information from those type of events. How do they secure that, and how do they best use that, I guess, to deliver better value, as you say, for the ratepayer?
Yeah, largely it's the old last generation, I think you'd call it, of the identity model, and then putting it in a database, and it's presumed it's secure. And then of course there's the matter of, data is just data unless it's accessed for a reason and a purpose to serve back that community. And so you need the insights. Data doesn't become insight until it's actually turned into knowledge. And the best way to do that is to get it out of there and make sure that the right folks, the stakeholders who can take action, have access to that data securely, because of course ratepayers are also worried about their banks protecting their data. Why wouldn't they worry about the local council or local government protecting their data as much?
And mate, I guess also when you talk about digitisation in the local government sphere, you think about continuous improvement like you would with a business or a company. So how do they continually improve on the services that they deliver to their communities, especially for the more needy in the community, the more vulnerable in the community? How can digitisation help that?
Yeah, well, this is where you might use some technologies like IoT, Internet of Things devices, basically sensors put in certain places to manage or even monitor activities so that you can determine where the homeless are that might need services, where the indigent might be that need help. And again, public safety is paramount, of course. Many of the metrics that local governments use are usually not so much how much profit do we make, that's not their concern. It's have we had less events? Have we had are we spending less to deliver the same or better services? Well, that also needs analysing and producing into insights. Once you have those insights, you know what to spend your budget on. And that can be reflective of a community safety profile, which should improve over time.
And Pete, you talk about the IoT, the Internet of Things and sensors. What does that mean? Like, what is the IoT or the Internet of Things made up of?
Yeah, well, basically it's a sensor. So that could be something as simple as applying it to, a public utility bin to determine whether or not it's full. that's a simple process. But if you're a local council that is also in charge of rivers and streams and creeks and what have you, tide flow, the amount of debris, having cameras on certain places to determine whether or not there's an imminent flow which would overflow into a public walkway or a car park, that kind of thing. These things imply better management of those community assets, but also becoming proactive with technology is really what it's all about.
So a lot of planning and preparedness, and I guess that rolls into the disaster relief and recovery space. It's all about the planning and the preparedness, and we've fortunately or unfortunately been a part of many disasters, not only for various local governments across Australia, but also in the region. How could the IoT help in disaster relief and disaster recovery? Or more so, the planning and preparedness, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was January 2019, there were two fatalities on the Nepean River, and it always made me wonder if there were sensors on the buoys, the floating buoys that were on the river, if they were detected as to having moved a particular from one geography to another. In other words, the river is not only in flow, it's in flood. If that was known ahead of time, then proactive services could have arrived at the river, looked at the amount of debris building up under the bridge or whatever it might have been, in order to proactively protect the safety of the community. But in terms of disaster relief and recovery, if you've got dozens or potentially hundreds of people who are out in the field deployed, that could be first responders, but you also got SES and other volunteers. They will be deployed in places which may be considered at risk or dangerous in order to try and either rescue or support folks who are in need, or even cleanup and recovery exercises. Many of these things need to be managed also from a personnel point of view. You need to know whether your folks are safe and where they are, and so if they need help as well. So it's just not, it's beyond the standard communications. It's really using technology to give you data to make you informed about how to either respond or plan.
So, Pete, what could you give us an example or a challenge that local governments face that digitisation of data and systems might be able to solve?
There's some other issues which are also facing councils as they deploy to electric vehicles and what have you. They're having to work out all sorts of things about what the reach and range of those vehicles are. I have first-hand knowledge that sometimes there's a bit of a conundrum as to who has the vehicle and how powered they are, recharged, and so therefore they're not available to the next person. Now, if they were responding to a public safety issue and the battery on that electric vehicle was down to 22%, that could be a problem. Having the insights and the analytics around how that new infrastructure is performing is also very helpful. And then, of course, you've got things like portable power being deployed for public and community events. Could be a local triathlon, could be a concert, could be anything like that, where you'd need to know where that power unit is, how much fuel it's got in it, are the lights performing, is there local comms available, should anything go wrong, or if they want to extend that event over multiple days. So there's many reasons why Vaxa needs to get involved in terms of analysing, ideating on what that problem is, and then literally producing outcomes to the mutual benefit.
That's another conversation we need to have. We need to get young Curtis West from Vaxa Analytics involved in our next conversation around this. He's got a brain the size of a planet and should be working for NASA, but instead he's with us. But you're right. I mean, you talk about especially electric vehicles and in times of disaster and an emergency, and not just council or state government-owned vehicles, but you look at all the suppliers in the ecosystem, in the value and supply chain, in planning for and responding and recovery to a natural disaster or a man-made event. And obviously electric vehicles are a new technology that we're adopting. We've obviously we had a chat earlier with Paddy Hallinan about strategy, government strategies. It's obviously a top-down cascading approach where we've had strategies put upon us or targets put upon us to meet certain green figures and environment figures and indices, and it's sort of pushed down onto the end user. How can you help local governments, I guess, meet these particular types of targets and also meet the community expectation as well, whilst responding to disaster situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes down to, instead of the devil in the detail, it's the devil is in the data. But there's a problem if you don't have the data. And so what is your ESG footprint or your index for your council or your local government environment? And how does that play into what the obligations are that have been set nationally, and internationally with our green and economy environment?
Pete, we know that local governments are collecting data, but what are they doing with it, and what challenges are they facing with that data and putting it to best use? And I guess, how could you help them make best use of that data?
Well, there's no doubt they're collecting a lot of data, but that data can just sit there and it gets called up reactively often. The idea is to get on top of it. I've heard many government department heads tell me, I just want a dashboard so I can tell how to prioritise and deploy my wonderful skill inventory, my people, into the field and get stuff done. Now, you can have a data lake, but if you're not accessing it and converting that to insights, then you really can't take the action that we know that they actually want to take. And yet, some of that data is collected still in a notebook, so it sits on the dashboard of that electric vehicle. That's probably not being taken up in good time. And then, of course, we've got this burgeoning 24/7 economy is about to happen in the major cities, especially with an Olympic year coming up in 2032, in Brisbane especially. There's a lot of things around what interaction with the council or local government would want to increase tourism and have that economy interact with itself. And that's great data to have. I suspect there's some next generation things that governments could do with the data they're already collecting, provided they have the insights, and turn those insights and optimize it for the best possible use of resources available.
Your background, or one of the many things you do, you're a network architect.
Yeah.
How would you advise local governments on the first steps in obviously creating the right environment to capture and manage data? And there's also obviously some sensitive data with consumers or ratepayers' data as personal information. How would you advise local governments to move forward and take the next step?
Well, I'd invite those governments or local council people to literally workshop with me and look at what is currently electronic, what is digitised, and what is not. There's still a heck of a lot of manual-based services. If those who are listening, I would respectfully challenge you on knowing whether or not you knew every single parking sign or alcohol-free zone, and whether or not the recency of those zones are still in play. That kind of data will also inform go to other services like police, who need to then monitor all those kinds of things. There's a knock-on effect to the data held by a local government or a local council, and how that can inform other stakeholders who are actually participants in that community safety or public safety environment. We can set up a baseline workshop, work out what you're trying to achieve, and then we can work out what needs digitising, because I think you'll find that kind of investment will play back on itself for both cost savings and the increase to public safety and community event indexes. And you might find your ESG score might be better than you think.
Sounds like it could be an election winner for a lot of mayors across local governments in Australia and other regions across the Indo-Pacific as well, Pete. Mate, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful of you to join us all the way from down in Sydney.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks very much for the chat. I'm pretty excited about this because I think there's a lot of things we can achieve together.
Beautiful. Thanks, Pete.
All right. Thanks very much.